Fresh off 2004's WWE draft, the WWE product as a whole changed drastically, for good and for bad. For SmackDown, it was awkward and very dry in some areas. It got to a point where Bradshaw became a challenger to the WWE title, and you tell somebody this the day after WrestleMania 20, they'll be thinking you hung out with RVD. It just seems so far-fetched and is a very rare sight. Jinder Mahal obviously comes to mind as an unlikely champion, but luckily for JBL, he properly integrated into his role as time went on, but around here it was bizarre. Among other problems on the SmackDown roster was the constant rematches between John Cena and Rene Dupree, the fact that nobody was credible enough to wrestle at the top, and coupled with some random-ass gimmicks, this makes SmackDown of 04 to 05 a rough time period for the Blue brand. As always, bad times don't last, and the show adjusted in time for WrestleMania 21 because loads of talent returned or became bigger stars. On the other side, none of these problems plagued Monday nights. The show was just so damn consistent from all areas. You hear the intro, all is hype, but then you witness Randy Orton pissing off Triple H or Batista causing chaos. I often notice people trash Raw of 02 to 05, and obviously many of us love that era, but usually this version of Raw, 2004 to 2005, is severely overlooked. Those star power, great matches, entertaining stories, and everything connected. Of course, we can't constantly shill, there's always issues. The fact that the Diva Search had more TV time than half the roster, and other things, but for now, let's get into it. Raw of 2002 to 2004 was somewhat odd. In the early days of the show, it felt very Attitude Era-ish and lacked a new identity. SmackDown, on the other hand, figured things out and were excellent week to week with their formula. It took the Red brand a while to properly integrate their style. Whenever I think of Raw 2003, it gives off a WCW 2003 vibe because of the roster, the commentary table being on the stage, and by 2004, Raw had its identity for good and for bad. The problem initially with the show was the fact that they were constantly messing around with different things, and also the main event scene lacking new blood as time went on. In the beginning, it was Triple H and Shawn Michaels. Sure, in between you have Scott Steiner, Kevin Nash, hell, Goldberg won the title at one point. But at the end of the day, those two were permanent fixtures on top. Enter Chris Benoit. Fresh off a grueling stint in SmackDown where Paul Heyman was constantly throwing things against him, Benoit wins the Royal Rumble, disappears like this guy, and he's on Raw. With the addition of Benoit on the main event scene, it made things fresh and set the stage for the next year of Raw programming, which saw Randy Orton and most importantly Batista rise in star power and card positioning. And because if things are good at the top, it's very likely the bottom follows as well, but what we're about to talk about certainly wasn't that. That being the Kane and Lana storyline. After taking a tombstone at the hands of his brother, The Undertaker at WrestleMania 20, Kane essentially became a predator and did some very unlawful things to Lita, which resulted in her carrying his baby. This is the most 2004 WWE thing I've ever written. Then he marries her, which was something Trish Stratus was more than excited about. Hell, she was more excited than Kane himself, and Matt Hardy being the boyfriend with a vengeance is nowhere to be found because he lost a damn wager match, till death do us part, and was taken out due to injury. And the craziest part of all of this is Kane turned face 2 months later because some random jobber named Snitsky fell right onto Lita, giving her a miscarriage. And this random jobber becomes a mainstay on the roster. At least he had a notable story to debut on. And even then, he was also apparently with Lita in the past. So she sides with Kane to take him out. And it sounds like a parody of a drama show. Some people had issues with the premise of the entire story as they felt it was tasteless. Others thought the story shouldn't have happened in general. And then there's some of you who actually like it. Me personally, I thought it was so damn messy and ridiculous. And if there's one positive from this storyline, it's that things slowly transitioned to an Edge and Lita partnership, which ended up helping Edge greatly. It's not like he was gonna suffer, but he was much better suited as this slimy Mr. Steal Your Girl entitled type at the time rather than that paranoid lunatic that was obsessed with title shots or whatever the hell it was. Lita was in her natural state, at least at this point, because the fans were vicariously booing her and it didn't benefit anyone. So there was a positive to come from the storyline. With this video being in 2004, you just know one of those random ass ideas WWE had have to be mentioned. The Diva Search. Now, of course, if we're looking at today, this would never happen. If you appear on a swimsuit competition or just some magazine, the higher-ups join the chat quicker than Batista does when he hears the 2 words title shot. With over 20 women initially in the competition, each week a couple of them get eliminated via fan vote, and whoever remains wins a WWE contract. Think of it as Toughen Up, but without the word tough and instead hot. That's basically it. This led to the Diva Search segments taking up so much TV time that even Triple H at the main eventer's time was dwarfed. It was disastrous. And it's kind of entertaining in a bad way. And add to that, if you were a kid, well, you just had to jump out the window, basically. Each week, there's a different type of competition. Some of the fans are happy at what their eyes were seeing, but the promos were something else. You can clearly notice that a bunch never watched wrestling. They're out here saying words that will ruin this video's reach. But let me mention a few things. hoe, boobs, and white substance. That's all I'm gonna say. Those three words relate to this the Diva segment. This one segment had all of that, and it was the most unrestricted promo you'll ever see from this era of WWE. Some of the woman cut promos that make Tito Ortiz sound like Stone Cold on the mic, and it was just unpleasant. Every week there's women wrestling in the ring. They can talk, and of course they know how to wrestle. So why should you do this? Oh, we all know why. Because they want to increase ratings. I mean, at the time they were experimenting. So, it's expected they were going to do something like this. Christy Hemme winning the competition was the right choice, I guess, because she had the best personality out of the bunch. And was one of the couple that are still in the wrestling business to this very day. While others didn't even know who Stephanie McMahon was. It was a horrible competition, and even then, they did it 3 more times. Luckily, in those attempts, many signed with the company and remained for a while, with some being missed to this day like Eve Torres. Among the talent to break out in the early 2000s, this was a man who was severely unlucky when it came to timing. Edge. After winning King of the Ring in the Intercontinental Championship, it seemed like a matter of time before Edge captured the World Championship. Everything was going well for him here. He had that babyface fire along with the crowd's backing. He was charismatic, good wrestler in ring, and was their guy. However, a neck injury kept Edge sidelined for over a year, and by the time he returned, nobody was that happy. Sure, they were happy initially. They're like, oh, Edge is back. But once the return boost faded, they turned on him. Why? There was just more interesting characters on the roster, and he wasn't lighting the world on fire with his performances. He's out here talking about taking down Evolution, while the only thing that was taken down was the crowd's love for him. Of course, not everybody turned on Edge, but it was clear that something had to change. So they turned him heel, and instantly he got back his form. This was perfect timing for him, as the heel side of the main event scene was starting to become light. Randy Orton was a face, Batista was slowly turning, and Edge easily slotted in to become number 2. He was having great performances and was this crazy lunatic who was out to get that title by any means necessary. And once he won Money in the Bank and got Lita, the sky was the limit for the future Rated R superstar. Talk about turning a negative into a super positive. I mean, it also helped that he had legit heat due to the whole Matt Hardy thing, but I think regardless, Edge was on his way. It's just the Lita thing accelerated his push and turned him into a bigger star. One of the most conflicting things from 04-05 Raw, well, the most in my opinion, is the Divas division. Now, ever since the brand split began, the women had a bright spotlight on them. Not to the extent of today's spotlight, which will make you blind if you stare at it, but a much bigger than WWE had in years. They had their own storylines that weren't just, I want the title, yada yada. This version of the division was the strongest when you look at the roster. The options were there, but even then it's a letdown. So at face value, the roster had Trish Stratus, Lita, Molly Holly, Victoria, Jazz, and Gail Kim. It's similar to 2003's, right? Unlike 02 and 03 though, Lita was healthy, Trish Stratus had a much more compelling character, and Victoria was now a babyface. But even then at times, it felt dry. Molly Holly stopped getting pushed in favor of being the jobber with championship experience. Hell, she was losing to Stacey Keibler at some points. Victoria went from a crazy woman to a dancer. We gotta mention this, it's essential to evolve as a character. Victoria's a babyface now, but how do you go from looking like you're paranoid to somebody who's dancing like her push depended on it? I think WWE went on the SVR entrance motions and randomly chose something because this was out of character. It's like John Cena coming out as a farmer. It's like Randy Orton coming out as a German Shepherd. Other than that, there wasn't much notable talent other than the Austin and Rawk of the women's division, Trish Stratus and Lita. They were at a level in terms of star power further than the others. But before I get to them, I'd like to mention that some of these women, Jazz and Gail Kim, were released in November, further adding to the problems in the division. And if that wasn't bad enough, Molly Holly left a few months after WrestleMania 21. So other than the big two, the division was dry. Luckily though, those two, Trish and Lita, did such a great job with their feud, nobody even remembers that. With Trish Stratus a heel once again, it resulted in these two crossing paths. There's always those two rivals who might be on good terms now, but they'll have problems later. It felt very high school-esque with the popular girl picking on others and having her posse, that being the default heels, adding insult to injury in particular to Lita. Made fun of her until she struck with venom. It clearly overwhelmed Trish in storyline because Lita was out here drawing blood. Her nose was broken, along with her pride, and it went from bad to worse as she lost the women's title in one of the most memorable Raw main events. All was good. This program was going to WrestleMania, but then Lita tore her ACL, leading to Christy Hemme feuding with Trish and having a position she clearly wasn't ready for. I mean, it just felt like Trish was better than her, and she was never in danger of losing the title. Like, when you look at the feud, you look back on it, her opponent didn't pose much of a threat. Other than that, Trish took a 4-month hiatus due to injury and kept the title throughout the summer. I mean, that shows you the condition of the division at this point. It was Trish and Lita. Other than that, you might have something, but it ain't really a big deal. As always, early 2000s WWE was something else, from the storylines to the gimmicks. Usually when we speak about the controversial gimmicks from this era, we have to mention Eugene. Eugene was an individual who found inspiration from the colossal giants and conquering heroes of 80s and 90s WWE. He would go as far as to emulate other wrestlers paying homage, but Eugene, despite the challenges others constantly told him about, felt that he could go into what was known as uncharted territory for most and become a wrestler. This was despite his uncle Eric's wishes. Immediately, Eugene got over as a character, fans got behind him easily with the vignettes and the fact that nobody liked the coach as well. The Rawk returned and endorsed the new star, which also helped a bit, but soon enough though, he crossed paths with Triple H, and despite everybody cheering for Eugene, that fizzled out after the game beat him at SummerSlam. From there, he was paired with William Regal, winning the tag titles before suffering an injury, which left him sidelined for 6 months. Since then, he was never the same. Other than the first few months, his character was never sustainable, he was pushed far too high on the card. Fans loved him though. Awesome 2 months, and just looking at his character, man, WWE was really taking risks around here. Some consider him inspirational, while others feel that his gimmick was controversial, maybe even offensive. What do you think? Establishing yourself in the world of professional wrestling is easier said than done. You have to deal with a lot. Add to that, you have to excel in your craft. Even then, the fans might not care, so you bring out your character. This character could be anything as long as you connect with the audience, and on the Raw roster was an egotistical, selfish, often dramatic, for the sake of being dramatic individual, who was as exactly described. He perfected his craft and had the character as well. Chris Jericho. Y2J was finally back to being a face, but lacked the push that, in my opinion, should have come with the turn. Instead, he was back to being mid-card Jericho, even though the very last time he was a good guy, he was fighting for one of the biggest prizes. Here, he had the haircut, which many have often made fun of, and personally, it just wasn't an iconic look. Then again, this run in itself wasn't iconic. He wasn't exactly worse off than he was as a heel, but he was stuck in the same position, and it also didn't help that at times, he lacked those sparkles shining on him. Like in 2003, he was always doing something funny, showing so much charisma, and while he did have charisma in moments where he showed that awesomeness, it wasn't the same, especially after the Christian feud. The man was in form. He's trashing Trish with the entire crowd behind him. He had that babyface fire to him, but after that, occasional moments, and it also didn't help that he was being burnt out. So it was best for him to leave, but not before turning heel. While Jericho was checked out though, another man felt like the hungriest wrestler on the roster. Shelton Benjamin. This man was a fresh addition to Raw. He was excellent in ring, had the crowd behind him, and while things didn't turn out so well, at least as well as others thought, he had a nice run during this year of Raw, holding the IC title for 8 months. Unlike Benjamin, this man didn't hold championship gold for long, and it didn't hurt him as he relied on his own hype. I'm talking about Christian. Captain Charisma often felt that his star power was taken in places and was the most confident wrestler on the roster. He obviously had to back it up, especially with Trish Stratus by his side. He had to show everyone that he ain't no joke, and even brought in a problem solver of sorts, Tyson Tomko. Sure, Trish left, but Tomko was by his side the entire time. He got new music, slowly gained momentum, and attention from some in the crowd. After WrestleMania 21, though, his popularity somewhat exploded. Was he the most over wrestler on the roster? No, but he was definitely one of. He was near the top, and it ain't no exaggeration. You just gotta look at the crowd reactions from that time period. There was this Raw where he really shined bright, then Backlash where he called out half the main eventers, including John Cena, and of course that Raw in Calgary where he was so over, they had to call him out just to cut a 2-minute promo. By the time each side traded wrestlers in the draft, it seemed like that sky was the limit for Christian. But moving to SmackDown, coupled with the lack of true interest from others, the higher-ups, prevented him from remaining an upper mid-carder, an occasional main eventer. He could have feuded with John Cena on Raw, but the feud was over before it properly began, as Y2J basically took his spot. It's a shame how Christian's run ended here, as I felt like there could have been something more with him. Maybe it could have led to that world title. But I highly doubt that if they actually put effort into him, they were actually going to have him beat John Cena for that title, because that sounds wild. One of the things I always thought was a weakness of the Ruthless Aggression era was the tag team division. In the early days, it was very strong, several notable wrestlers vying it out to call themselves tag team champions. Unfortunately, though, the momentum from the early days was rarely seen. For 04-05 Raw, there was some decent stuff such as the Benoit and Edge tag team facing off against La Resistance, but other than that, not much. Sometimes the tag titles weren't defended on pay-per-view, and the division as a whole was a stark contrast from 2002 to 2004. It was La Resistance and wherever random tag team. Obviously, a certain random tag team, such as Rigo and Tajiri, would work, but for the most part, the division was forgettable. I mean, nobody's giving me the call, damn, that Raw 2004 division was nice, unless they got a blunt in hand, and even then, I don't think so. But you know what was nice? The unique additions to the show. I'm not talking about the Diva Search, but things that were aesthetically pleasing or ideas that are still being used to this day. Taboo Tuesday is one of those things that everyone wishes for. It's odd that in this day and age of the internet that WWE don't have a pay-per-view centered on that. Obviously, the choices were so shallow. Steel cage, normal match, arm wrestling. Then on the other side, slap contest, jump rope contest, street fight. But I gave the fans power, and it's something that's creative. That's what they brought here in October 2004. It was a very unique idea and really set the pay-per-view apart from others. among other things, was allowing for these 4 men to run Raw. I was working on a video about this a while ago and I still never finished it. One thing that was noticeable was that each man was trying to be distinctive from the other. Maven wanted to win the title, and while Benoit wanted to win the title as well, he wanted to put on fights. He's like, oh, all you have to do is knock on my door, you'll get any match you want. Orton was trying to be cool with the ladies, and Chris Jericho was all about the party. It was a nice departure from the usual and allowed for the shows to stand out. And another thing that easily stands out to me is that episode in Japan. How many episodes of Raw are in Europe or North America? Hell, take out the UK, there's that episode in Berlin, the episode in Milan, and then there's the episode in Japan. You get an entirely different crowd, a different feel in general, and while the content of the show was not completely different, it's cool to see the wrestlers in another environment. Now, these 3 things were nice enough, but the one thing that this has over them is the longevity. Money in the Bank. Used as a launching pad to many's career, Money in the Bank has had quite the moments throughout the entire run. And this all started with one of the most iconic ladder matches in WWE history at WrestleMania 21. These men went through hell, all for a title shot, and if they fail to win, they're basically injured, and even the winner has to suffer a lot. I just loved how the match was treated by the commentary and by the wrestlers. Sure, you get the chance to win the briefcase, but at the same time, you're basically sacrificing yourself for a briefcase, which doesn't even guarantee you're the champion. It was a very nice idea, and it's no wonder that it's worked to this very day. Usually when hearing about 04-05 Raw, the first person I assume that comes to mind is Triple H. He's basically the main character of the show until Batista's push begins, but the other man you think of is Chris Benoit. His meteoric rise from upper mid-card to WrestleMania main eventer was truly captivating, and he easily has a claim for being the MVP of 04 Raw. Why? This man would come out, say he wants to wrestle, put on an absolute show with Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and Randy Orton, especially Shawn Michaels. Benoit was never the best talker. He did his work in the ring. I mean, when he comes out, the man just wants to get to the ring. There's no showboating, none of that. And looking back from that time period's perspective, he was the single most impactful wrestler to have jumped to Raw that year. The moment he comes in, everything changes. The match quality increased gradually, and obviously he's not single-handedly responsible because others were drafted, some stepped it up, but it really kicked up when he came, especially after the draft. And I'm going to say this is not even a hot take, but from the entire Ruthless Aggression era on the Raw side, 2004 was the strongest in-ring year, and part of that is because of Benoit. Even though he lost the title and fell down the card, if he was still there, you were guaranteed a good match. His impact is clear, and for certain he was one of the MVPs of the year. Before I dive deep into some of the most memorable wrestlers / storylines of this era, I'd like to give an honorable mention to a few things. Matt Hardy's push never went that far due to injury. It's unfortunate for Matt that he didn't get a chance to wrestle for several months, but even if he did, there was still that whole Lita thing and he ended up being released. Similar to Matt, Rhino was released in the same week. He was mostly in the upper mid-card and didn't have a standout moment. If anything, he peaked the night he was drafted as he faced Chris Benoit for the world title. Muhammad Hassan up to the 2005 draft had a bright future ahead of him and nobody knew what was yet to come. I would talk about him, but I've done that a couple of times in a couple of other videos. Maven had a minor push but turned heel, went nowhere with Simon Dean, who was a fitness expert who was constantly trying to make others buy his products for his benefit. And of course, he'd rudely try to sell these products and take an ass kicking. Viscera's back, but he was the same man everyone knew up until the very end where he became a ladies' man of sorts. It was a very random character change because everyone was accustomed to him being this big, mean guy who rarely spoke. And again, it got some eyes on him and in storylines some ladies as well. Chris Masters was a throwback to those big, strong heels of old that would constantly talk and hype themselves up, similar to Lex Luger in the early 90s. The Hurricane and Rosie were well-needed additions to the tag team division as it was basically La Resistance versus anyone else, and unlike almost every team that faced them, they actually won the titles by the draft. Shawn Michaels looks out of place in an honorable mentions part of the video, but this is where I feel he was. He did have a decent year, but he was out with injury throughout the summer and the fall. And other than that, he did have some nice storylines, with Benoit. He had those great matches. He ended the feud with Triple H. Of course, the feud with Edge where it got all personal. And then he capped off the run by teaming up with Hulk Hogan to face Muhammad Hassan and Daivari. So it wasn't a bad year. But I didn't really mention him here because I thought others deserved the spotlight on them more so. Eric Bischoff, he was mostly the same initially until Eugene cut his hair. He turned into a babyface of sorts. He was more fair. He wasn't sucking up to Evolution as he was previously, but this didn't last for long, and by the draft he was back to being the old Eric Bischoff everyone knew. Now that's done, let's talk about Randy Orton, a star who's considered a diamond in the rough by Triple H, a generational talent that had all the tools, but it was up to him to follow up. He had the look, the in-ring skill, the charisma, and of course the character. Up until 2004, the Legend Killer found moderate success capturing the Intercontinental Championship before Mick Foley helped them go from one point to another. When he came out of that Backlash match, he changed many's perception of him and was proving those believers right. So he lost the IC title after an amazing run and went straight for the world title. He shockingly or not won the title, youngest champion I should know, and obviously there's other reasons, Brock Lesnar, for that title change, but the man was now on top. All was good, but then he turns face in 2 seconds. Why? Because Triple H gets jealous and kicks him out and takes his title on his first title defense. Actually second, and from there he was the number 1 babyface on Raw until the end of the year when Batista pushed him aside. The thing with Orton's push is that he had his moments. He was messing with Evolution, the fans are cheering for him, and there's proof of this, you know. Survivor Series 2004 was his peak with the Legend Killer slaying his former mentor clean in the middle of the ring. Everyone's going crazy, they're cheering him on. After that though, it's a different story. He quickly cooled off after losing his big matches and was even getting booed at one point, so it was best to pivot to Batista. The problem with this run was the fact that it was rushed. He wins the title and is already a face? What's up with that? I know Booker, but I think it would have been best to wait it out a bit. You know, you have him win the title, then Triple H gets angry or something. Plus, he's just better as a heel for the moment. It was right place, wrong time. There was a few options for an Orton main event run at the time, but it is what it is. Triple H, though, I'd say he bounced back a bit. In 02-04, he cut promos that took up way too much time. It'd go, I'm the measuring stick in this industry. Then it would be like, here's the thing, Jericho, and he would say something to belittle his opponent. I mean, he's a heel in that regard. But it was more of the same, and it was repetitive. It also didn't help that he was the main character of the show. Like, we look at one perspective. Yes, Raw needed that established talent to lead them, and Triple H at face value is a nice choice, but he really should have lost more. Here, yeah, he talked a lot. Yeah, he won a lot, but it was better. His performances increased due to him finding form and also having great opponents. Plus, he was putting over others. That said, it was still the Reign of Terror. Don't think I'm shilling here giving out a hot take for the sake of I'm going to be like, oh, Reign of Terror wasn't bad. No. It's just not as rough as it was previously. In addition, this man ended it. Batista. Almost 300 pounds of brute strength and intensity. Ever since his first day, Batista was perceived as a high prospect, and while he was greener than a tree leaf in ring, he had improved significantly, and plus, he made up for it in intensity and charisma. Based on intensity alone, 2005 Batista might be my favorite in that area. He just looked so damn awesome doing whatever. Sure, he had his weaknesses, but who cares? And that's what the audience thought. He was mostly a mid-carder and involved in tag teams, but after the slightest of tension with Triple H, everyone wanted him to break free. Unlike Randy Orton, the Batista storyline was slowly done and allowed him to build some additional credibility and star power. I mean, Batista already looked credible, he just had to build up that resume. And by the time he turned face, he felt like he was on the same level as Triple H. And with that, he beat him at WrestleMania and followed with 2 colossal victories to establish himself as the man of 2005. It's nice that they booked him like that. There was only one instance where he looked somewhat weak, and that's to give Triple H a bit of a chance. It also helped that he never played hot potato. He was the same unstoppable guy that he was since the Royal Rumble. He destroyed Triple H in each of those 3 matches. It was an amazing turn of events and gave the Raw main event some fresh talent that was there to stay until, of course, the draft. So, I don't know, like, it's hard to say if this guy's Wrestler of the Year, but I'm going to get to that real soon. As for Diva of the Year, well, this is easy. Trish Stratus. It sounds like a basic answer because it's just that. Her heel turn elevated her to a higher level, and it's clear that she was seen as a bigger star in the women's division previously, but if 2005 Trish Stratus faced 2003 Trish Stratus in a match, it would be an easy win for 2005 in my opinion. Charisma was already there. It just increased, as did the promos and the stories she had. I can't see anybody had a better year than her, because if I were to say that, it would be a bit forced. Match of the year, this is somewhat a struggle. It's a strong year, and the only thing that's tougher than choosing one match from here is 2005 Batista. If I had to choose, it's that Backlash triple threat. I will say that if you are so insistent on the best from TV, I'm going to try to say something a bit different here. I'm not choosing Benoit and HBK, instead it's Shelton Benjamin and HBK. Unlike the former, this match stuck the landing, and even if you take that away, it was a tremendous matchup with a tremendous story of Shelton constantly topping HBK early on until the Heartbreak Kid flipped the switch and kicked his lights out with pure experience. Segment of the year is straight up Musical Chairs. A segment that was doomed to fail succeeded. It was fun, funny, and had different characters. Some were hotheads, some were douchey, some were pervs and allowed some legs to blind them from success, and all this makes Musical Chairs one of my favorite segments. Story of the year, is there any doubt? It has to be this. And the last thing we'd like to mention, Wrestler of the Year. Now the problem with choosing the Wrestler of the Year from 2005 Raw is the fact that each man had an uneven year. Benoit started off hot. He was the world champion, he had those amazing matches, but after SummerSlam, he cooled down. Triple H, I just don't feel like he had the same highs as the others. Randy Orton, great rise to the top, SummerSlam, all that, but after Survivor Series, it was kind of cold. Then there's Batista. He was slowly built up and then became this big-ass star. I wouldn't say overnight, but within a few months. So, you have those 4 men. Who am I choosing? I'm gonna choose Batista. You're probably gonna choose Chris Benoit, Randy Orton, but I'm gonna choose Batista. He had that star power. He had the amazing stories. And while he wasn't the in-ring performer of the year, that would be Chris Benoit, I'd choose him as the overall wrestler of the year. Alright, that's Raw 2004-2005. What makes it so good for me is the difference, the improvements over the previous year. 02 to 04 had its moments here and there, but its lows were very, 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 very bad. You have some storylines that were just bad. And while 04-05 did have its lows, the Diva Search, the highs here were much higher as well. You had some amazing matches on a weekly basis. And there is weaknesses. The Divas division, the tag team division were somewhat dull. But other than that, I just can't say this was disappointing. It was a great year for Raw. Way better than SmackDown. In every area. Characters, stories, matches, all of that. It was a significant improvement over the previous 2 years. And it unlocked the true potential the show had. Alright, what you guys think of 2004 to 2005 Raw? Please comment down below, and that's it for this video. Make sure you hit the sweet chin music on the like button and perhaps the Batista bomb on the subscribe button. Peace, I'm out.